It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
My guess is that many of these parents were really hard on this stuff when they were younger. And now they're a bit old and they're like, I had my emphasis in all the wrong places.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, welcome to the Happy Families podcast. My name's Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm here with Kylie, my wife and mum to our 6 kids. And today we're answering your questions. You can email us podcasts, that's podcasts with an S, podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au. Josh shot us through an email. Sorry, Kylie, I nearly said a text message. It's too long for a text message. An email, and I want to read it to you. This is a topic that we don't really talk about much on the podcast, and I don't know why. It's becoming increasingly relevant in our lives, and it's something that we've talked about in the 4 walls of our home a lot, usually with sighs and eye rolls. It has to do with our parents.
Uh-oh.
It has to do with grandparenting.
Uh-oh.
So let me read Josh's email. He said, in my family, I've noticed that when a set of grandparents first became grandparents, caring for the grandchild was like whitewashing in Tom Sawyer. The parent would say, "It's a privilege for you to fly down from Sydney to care for my child." And the grandparent would say, "Yes, it's so wonderful." Now, though, 8 years later, with more grandchildren around, they're less reliable. E.g., the parent will say, "Can you babysit from 2 to 4 while I'm working at home?" And the grandparent shows up at 3 o'clock. And they're also less independent. In the same situation, the grandparent will keep the child in the house to run around and push the door open while the parent is working. And so Josh says, I've got another couple of anecdotes for friends. A friend's parents are counterproductive when helping. We've been there. Additionally, those grandparents have lunch and coffee with their friends who are grandparents and share pictures and stories. So they want the stories and pictures, but they don't want to put in the effort to help. Josh says other grandparents have certain expectations, such as it's okay to start dinner at 7 p.m. There's conflict, there's lack of knowledge, there's lack of awareness, there's lack of emotional intelligence. I thought it would be great. I need some inspiration. Please help, Josh. So this is, I feel like we can actually in some ways do this podcast in like 2 minutes. My 2-minute, too long didn't read version is they've got their own lives to live. Be grateful. Let them be involved and recognize that they're going to do things differently to you. And that's okay because you're the primary caregiver. You're the primary parent and you will be more influential. Just let the kids have great relationships. That's my too long didn't read version.
So for me, I remember back to when you and I were planning to have our first baby.
Yeah.
And we used to look at parents with their kids and we would roll our eyes and go, we are never going to do that.
Totally.
Or our kids are never going to be like that. They're not going to speak like that.
We were going to be so good.
And we thought we knew it all.
Yep.
And I feel the same way about grandparenting. So you and I are not grandparents yet. Almost,
no, but it's only a few months away now. Yeah.
And I have this idealistic idea of what that will look like.
Yep.
And having experienced life with obviously 2 sets of grandparents for us and the ups and downs and the challenges around needing help and getting various levels of help over the years.
Yep.
I think I've got it all planned out. My idea of being available to my kids and therefore my grandkids at the drop of a hat is how I want to live my life.
And it's how Josh wants his parents to be available because he knows that they love the grandkids. He knows that they want to be involved, but they're just trying to do a little bit less parenting. They're trying to do it their way.
But I'm also at the point in my life where my kids need me less than they've ever needed me before. And I'm starting to dabble in things that I've never dabbled in before. I'm starting to actually get a life that I haven't been able to experience up until now. And I can see over time how trying to fit the grandkids in and around the newfound freedoms that I'm experiencing as a parent will be challenging. And just like becoming a parent for the first time opened my eyes to just how difficult my parents had it, I'm starting to recognize and see how challenging it is to coordinate everything. And you don't just have one child that you're dealing with. You actually have numerous families for most people.
Both of our parents have like between 15 and 22 grandchildren to spread themselves around.
And different parenting styles within that.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing in my parents often they're quite paralyzed in the way they interact with my kids from a parenting perspective, because you and I do things so differently to the way my sisters do things in their home.
Can you imagine grandparenting?
And my mum and dad don't know.
Can you imagine trying to grandparent the parenting experts' kids? Like, seriously. So I was a little bit glib. I was very, very short with Josh's comments before because I wanted to just highlight my real take-home message is just be grateful that they're in their lives. It's a joy. It's a privilege. They're not going to do things your way. And mostly, I think we just need to be cool with that. But I want to unpack that just a little more. When it comes to grandparents not doing things the way the parents want them done, let's remember a handful of things. First off, as Josh points out in his email, in the early days, the grandparents were all over this. They were like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I just want this baby in my life and I will do whatever I have to do it. But we know psychologically, we become accustomed to things. We become comfortable with things. We tend not to get as excited about the new shiny object when it's not quite as new and shiny.
Well, and then it starts speaking back to you.
And it starts doing poos and the parents aren't around to change them, so you've got to change the nappy instead.
Or the constant conversation, that's not how mum cuts my sandwiches.
Right. So, and grandparents have already been through this. They've already done it. And this brings me to my second point, and that is they did it their way. They look at you, and I would imagine that they're probably pretty proud of you. They're grateful that you're their kid, and they think that they did a reasonably good job of raising you. To some degree, a lot of grandparents are going to be a little bit offended that their kids are raising the grandkids differently to how they were raised. It's like, well, did I not do a good enough job? And many grandparents, whether they're doing it intentionally or not, they're not going to change their relationship habits when it comes to small children just because they're the grandparent now and not the parent. Now, many of them will. They'll become softer. They'll become more indulgent. They'll let the grandkids get away with things that the kids would never have gotten away with because they've learned not to sweat the small stuff and they love spoiling that little angel, that little cherub. But I really want to emphasize from a grandparent's perspective, what they're saying is, hang on, I'm living my life and it's my best life. I mean, my parents have just retired. And they are so happy. They're just loving it. But they keep on saying, don't know how we had time for work because we have got so much to do. And now that we're not working, we're able to go and do all of it. In fact, we still can't get it all done. There's so much that we want to do. And now we're also trying to fit in visits to our children to spend time with the grandchildren, to do the babysitting.
And we're no longer just around the corner. Literally all of your siblings are spread out all over the country.
Yeah, which may or may not be the case for Josh and for his friends, but there's this issue of just because they're grandparents and they're empty nesters doesn't mean that they're waiting around twiddling their thumbs hoping that we'll call them and say, please come and look after the children so that we can get some work done. In fact, it's pretty much the opposite. So when they do show up with all those grandchildren around, we should expect that they probably are going to be a little less reliable and they may have their own agenda. They may have preferences for how things might go. They may have activities that they want to do with the kids that weren't important to you, but they know that they're going to have fun with the kids. And so this is that bit where we sort of pause and say, I know I want to judge my parents because we're fighting with them about what and how. Like, oh, I just remembered a story. This is an embarrassing story for me to tell. We went out one night. I think at the time we had 3 small children. We'd gone out for a date and we came home a little later than we should have. I think we got home at about 9:15. Your parents, on a school night, had been looking after our children and the kids were still awake. Only one of them was old enough to be at school. The other 2 were preschoolers. And when we walked in the door, your parents were sitting in front of the TV with our kids watching a movie. And I actually cracked it. I just said, what in the world is going on? Why are the children not in bed? It's 9:15. Their bedtime is 7:30. And I launched into a lecture to your parents. I don't even know if I was studying psychology at the time. Maybe I'd just started. I don't know. It was very, very, very early in the piece. And I tore into your parents really rudely, completely inappropriately. I don't know if you remember that night.
Nope.
And as I've reflected on what happened, I just feel terrible for how I treated your parents. There they were, giving up their Thursday night or their Wednesday night so that you and I could have a nice time and regenerate our relationship. They'd spent time with the kids. They'd spent money on the kids. The kids had begged and pleaded, can we please watch this movie? And because they're grandparents and they love the grandkids, they acquiesced. They sat down on the couch and they thought, well, we'll have a nice quiet night. And once the movie's over, the kids can just hop into bed and they'll fall straight asleep because they'll be super tired. And I was rude. I hate how I treated them. I really feel bad for what I said and what I did. And it wasn't until a little bit later, as your parents were leaving, that your mum or your dad said something softly like, the movie only had 10 minutes to go and they really wanted to watch it and we were going to put them straight to bed. And I thought, wow, I came in and I caused an absolute storm. And 10 minutes later, if we'd just been 10 minutes later, I would never have known. The kids would have been in bed and everyone went to bed miserable because I had my own agenda. And so
I think that's part of the reason grandparents don't enforce the rules half the time. They don't see themselves as the enforcer. They see themselves as the soft place for our kids. And when we're not there, they don't want to see the kids upset. So, you know, if going to bed at 7 o'clock is going to cause such an upset and the kids are going to be distressed going to bed, that breaks a grandparent's heart. It breaks a parent's heart half the time. But you've got your routines and your structures as parents and you know how things work and you know how long the child's going to be upset for and you get the whole picture. Grandparents are coming in halfway through, trying to navigate the challenges that drive parents crazy and give them heavy hearts lots of the time. And grandparents are trying to be the soft place and find the way to do things with least resistance so that they're not seen as the enemy.
I love that. There's something else that's important to consider here, and that is, as I've researched for my new book, The Parenting Revolution, and written that book and talked about it ad nauseum over the last few months, something that strikes me in this conversation is that parenting is something that we think about today in ways that our parents did not. Parenting was not nearly as big a deal 1 or 2 generations ago as it is today. And so the idea that we would sit around and talk about parenting, it's kind of a new thing. It was not happening a generation and a half, 2 generations ago. Even our parents, they weren't that focused on it. It wasn't nearly as intense. It wasn't nearly as programmed and focused. It has changed in such dramatic ways. And so what we're doing in emails like this one from Josh is we're saying, now that we know what we know about parenting and now that parenting is as intense as it is and now that parenting has to be done the right way, the way that we say it needs to be done, the way that our family has decided is the right way that parenting is to be enforced.
I need you to catch up.
Yeah, you need to catch up and you need to do it my way. And the parents are like, you know what? We raised you differently and everything's fine.
But you know what else I think is happening? You talked about this idea of, you know, as we grow older, we soften. And I think that often the things that we as the parents are getting all worked up about, our parents are kind of saying, I know it feels like a really big deal right now because you're right in the thick of it. But after 20, 30, 40 years of life, I'm now recognizing it's not.
Yeah.
The things that, you know, don't sweat the small stuff. And I think that often the struggles that we have intergenerationally are because we still haven't got to that soft place.
And my guess is that many of these parents were really hard on this stuff when they were younger. And now they're a bit older and they're like, I had my emphasis in all the wrong places. So Josh, we really hope that this has been a head-turning, soul-expanding, eye-opening, paradigm-shifting conversation. Not that I'm trying to sell it too hard, but let's just be grateful for the fact that grandparents are involved. If tardiness is an issue, then not in the moment, but a little bit later, you might say, hey, the other day when you said you were going to come by at 2, we were so grateful that you did come by, but it was 3. Is life just really busy? Did you forget? Or did the time just not really matter to you because you're retired and you forgot that I'm still living my life on a schedule? And you can have a soft conversation with them. That still sounded a little bit harsh. It still sounded a bit passive-aggressive. I might rephrase that just a little bit. But really, we're having a conversation to make sure they're okay and to make sure that they understand. And then we can just say, do you reckon next time we can get you hit there?
I would have just asked, is everything okay? I was expecting you at 2 today.
Yes, perfect. You're setting the boundary and you did it so much better than me. But Josh, this is what we're looking for, a little bit of gratitude for the grandparents and a recognition that they're choosing to give up their time to be with the kids. And yes, it's important to them, but so are other things as well. And they do have to spread themselves kind of thin sometimes. If you have a question for us, feel free to shoot it through podcasts@happyfamilies.com.au. We might agree with you and we might not, but we will definitely give you a carefully considered opinion on how we can make our families happier. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. He does such a good job. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. He's not bad either. And for more information about making your family happier, please visit us and join the conversation at our Facebook page, Dr. Justin Coulston's Happy Families.